This is a Sessions video tutorial, Hard and Soft Edges.
In this video, I'm going to show you how to address edges in your portrait painting. As you make the transition from drawing mediums to painting mediums, you go from thinking in a linear fashion to thinking in terms of shapes. In other words, lines in drawing, which you actually put down with the drawing utensil, those are a man-made convention. Lines don't necessarily exist in nature. What lines are the junction between two shapes of opposing value or color. And you can start shifting your mindset towards being shape-oriented rather than line-oriented. The nice thing about painting is that there's so much room to play with edges. And edges I consider almost a fourth element to painting beyond drawing color and value. So there are a couple points that I would pick out in this painting where I'll really hone focus. I'll have sharp edges. Other areas I'll dissolve and obscure. There's a tendency when we begin painting or move from drawing to painting to paint within lines. We'll paint, I've done it to an extent here, I've painted the shadow up to my initial line and then I've stopped short. Now John Singer Sargent, was said to have taken his skin tones outside of their perimeters, out of their confining lines. For instance, in this ear, right now I'm working within the lines, and then I'm going to cover over this line and have the ear and the flesh bleed into the space that will eventually be the background, with the intention of eventually coming back, revisiting, and carving that shape back out again. There's some fear here because we're losing the drawing a little bit, but that's where our confidence in our drawing skills comes in handy. Because if you can draw that correctly once, you can draw it again. I'm going to mix up a background color, a dark tone, and carve back into the ear and reestablish that line. Now you'll see where there's an overlap between the background color, where the background color is coming into contact with the flesh tone. There's sort of a bleeding effect. There's a softness that occurs. And that softness is pleasant. It should really exist everywhere in the painting if you're working in this fashion where you're not constrained by lines, not painting within lines, coloring between lines. What will eventually make the painting really work is if you select several places, maybe two or three areas of focus in the entire painting where you'll have razor sharp edges. I think that playing with varying edges makes a painting more dynamic. It mimics the action of our eye, the way our eye will focus in on an object and all other areas will blur out. Where I choose to really develop my areas of focus, tight focus, are areas of high contrast, a lot of information, or just high interest. But this ear is an area that's really drawing my eye because it's a really light's really hitting this ear and is really high in value. It meets directly with one of the darkest places in the painting, which is the shadowed background. I'd say more notably even is where the shadow edge of the face meets the shadow on the vest. When I squint my eyes, there's really no distinction between the two. They're so similar in value and color. And so I'll actually just obscure it completely. If I need to recover it, I'll come back in and pull it out again slightly. If you look at Rembrandt, he was a master of dissolving edges. The shadow sides of his figures would dissolve into the dark, hazy environments that they were in. People tend to turn to eyes as the default point of interest, but oftentimes the eye is not the most important part. When I look up there, there's actually more definition in, say, the edge of the nose, where the edge of the nose meets the shadow cast by his cheek, or maybe a little highlight right in the corner of his eye. For these light areas, I really build up the paint. I use a lot more white. I have sort of a creamy, thicker consistency and more paint. And I'll strike it in once and just forget about it. The effect of pulling a light tone over a previously dark tone, and you see this speckling action happen. It pulls your eye in. It registers as 1,000 little sharp edges. So you can use that to your advantage and highlight areas. This is a painting I did as a student where I really played around with changing edges, and sums up my basic philosophy on where to sharpen up and where to soften. The point that commands the most interest and has the most contrast is right around the eye area. Now, most of the eye is obscured in shadow, but where that light nicked the bottom lid was really interesting, and I really wanted to punch that up. So I took one pass, a loaded brush, and I just struck it in. Similarly, under the eye, there's a certain texture of skin there that's oilier than the rest of the face and was reflecting in a way off this glancing light. And I scumbled there, loaded up the brush with light tone and struck it in, made one light pass, and I got this speckly texture which helps really make it punch. The edge of the face is somewhere in the middle, a relatively hard edge, as it's the difference between planes and space. Here I've really played up the role of softening in backgrounds. Perhaps too much, but I painted this in as I would paint anything on his body, and afterwards, while the paint was still wet, came in with a big brush and just brushed the whole thing out. It's a little sad to see some of your detail and your drawing go, but I think in the end it just makes the model pop right off the background. I feel that paintings that lack edge variation, if they're towards the blurry side, they just look unfinished or lack that little bit of zing. And then if all the edges are hard, it tends to look amateurish or illustrative. Now, I feel that the haziness that I've put between the background and his face, it obscures his face too much. And I feel it's a little invented. It's not, the contrast between those two areas is a little stronger than that. So I'm going to return to that area, remix the background color, and I'm going to carve back into his face. And very subtly, I'm recovering the hardness of that line. It's still so soft. But what makes an edge hard or soft is really the width. It can occur within a 1/16 of an inch. If there's an area within a form where there was previously a hard delineation of light and shadow, oftentimes at this coloring stage, that delineation doesn't become so clear. So what I do is lay two colors next to each other, two shapes, take a clean brush and zigzag or just drag one color into the other, and it just serves to soften it up, make it turn. It's the effect of blending without getting terribly nitpicky, without bringing the soft brushes in and dragging and just softly blending. I'm looking at the overhang of the lid over the shadow that's cast on the eye. A very hard line. I'm going to mix up that color with a fair amount of confidence. I'll lay it on and really carve out that edge. And it immediately pulls your eye into that spot. That razor sharp edge commands so much attention. So in the background, I've rendered the top of the screen. And although when I look at it, it's a sharp edge, when I look at the larger picture, I don't think it deserves priority. So I've painted it in as I've seen it. But then I'll come back in with a large number 7. And I'm just going to zigzag over it lightly, knock it back, drag one area into the other, and then brush it out again. That wraps up the discussion of edges in portrait painting. Pay attention to how you handle these elements in your own work.
Did you like this video? Then subscribe today to stay up to date on our channel or follow us on Google+, Twitter, and Facebook. Visit sessions.edu for more info on classes and admissions. Also, don't forget to check out the links to free downloadable content in the description. Thanks for watching.